We've always lived within like 30 minutes of my in-laws, my brother and sister. So every holiday.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. I'm going to call to order this work session for Tuesday, January 17th, 2023. Will you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Mayor Karspeck.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Gray.
Here.
Trustee Hardy.
Yes.
Trustee Ayers.
Here.
Trustee Murphy.
Yes.
Trustee Sorcelli and Trustee Butler are absent.
Okay, thank you very much. This is a work session, so we won't have any public comment or reports at the end. And I'll just turn it over to Administrator Kirk to kind of talk about just why tonight and stuff.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Karspeck, and appreciate you guys coming out on a snowy night tonight. As you may recall, during our board retreat, as you were setting goals, you asked us to come and make a presentation about our economic development efforts and economic development plans, knowing that economic development, especially coming out of kind of COVID and looking at increased interest rates and maybe a slowdown in the economy and certainly a slowdown in building, all those things, you know, what are we doing and what should we be doing? So Walt Elish, our business development manager, is here tonight to talk you through what he does on a regular basis, give you some broad overview and information about economic development efforts here in Berthoud. And then in conjunction with that, we felt like it made a lot of sense to come in and share with you kind of what is a downtown development authority. That idea has been talked about a lot over the last, I don't know, at least the 5 years I've been here. It's come up several times. It could be a tool for us to use to strengthen and enhance downtown as it grows and develops and redevelops. And so we wanted to just get that information in front of you to start to think about. We're not necessarily advocating one way or the other at this point, but just an opportunity to learn about what that is and how that might fit into our economic development efforts. So it felt like it all made sense together. And if it's okay with you, I'll just turn it over to Walt and he can kind of start there and we'll go through tonight. He'll present information, opportunity to ask questions. There's obviously no decisions to be made tonight. And we can certainly come back in front of you again with more specifics as needed as we get more direction about where we go from here.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Mayor.
Absolutely.
Pleasure meeting with you all. And I really enjoyed doing this. I'm open, please feel free to ask questions as we go through this. Because I'm always open to suggestions. Although I think I know what I'm doing, I like to think I know what I'm doing, but I'm always open for new ideas and, and Chris and I meet on a regular basis, so I keep Chris informed of everything that I'm doing, pretty much everything. And he's been very supportive as well. So real quick, just gonna go through a few slides, and this was in your packets too, if you had a chance to review it, and just look at it. Just give you a sense of what Berthoud's like. You know, it's a quaint, as we know, it's a quaint community. We all love it. It's known for its quaintness, and I know there's interest from you all and others to not only keep the quaintness, but grow it, reasonably, and that's probably what I do. Some recent statistics. We are estimating our population about 12.5. That's what we're estimating based on a number of criteria. The census has us at about 11.7. Just a good estimate. It depends who I'm talking to too. If I'm talking to a retailer or a manufacturer, I can make a case for 13 or 14,000. But I think 12.5 is a good number. Last year, over the last 4 years, we averaged 421 permits. This past year was quite challenging for not only us, but for all the communities when it comes to residential permits, for most communities. And so they brought that number down a bit. Otherwise, we'd be pushing about 500 permits on average past 4 years. Just to give you an idea, for those of you who may not, I know the mayor and I and Chris go out and meet with these companies pretty frequently. You may not know of them, and if you're interested in going out and meeting 1 or 2 or 3 of these, please let me know. Be more than happy to bring you along as Chris and I go meet and the mayor. We have a lot of good companies. They're all small. Ursa Major, you all are very familiar with Ursa Major. They're our poster child right now and continue to grow. But we have a lot of all these companies pretty much are all small. They've been here, and as the mayor knows, and those who've been around Tim, they've been in town for quite some time, doing very good work. I think so anyway. And I pretty much meet with almost all of them throughout the course of the year. This is quite interesting, I think. I presented this to a number of site consultants this past year. You wouldn't have thought of this, or I mean, maybe most people don't, but over the last couple of years, there's over $90 million of new investment in town, in Berthoud. This is just some of the highlights of the larger projects. Of course, there's a major, the expansion out of Northern Water. That small building in the middle is a 10,000 square foot building that ATI put up 3 years ago. ATI, Associated Thermoforming Inc., for those of you who may not know them, they're on 2nd Street. And then the latest new construction is Agile RF Systems out on 1st Street. It's a 10,000 square foot building. Currently, I'm helping them trying to find a tenant for the remaining 4,000. They're using 6,000 square feet in there. I'm helping them trying to find another, and their broker. They have a broker. So I guess I'm helping the broker and them find a tenant for the other 4,000 square feet. There's also a small lot just to the north of them that they own, that if we could find a company to build on that, and if we could work it out with our planning department, it's another opportunity for a small business. Just my focus, business retention, attraction, communication. By communication, I stay in touch with most of our businesses. I have a pretty good database. Can't say it's every business in town. I mean, if you're working out of your home, I probably don't have you, unless they somehow contact me. But for businesses that have a storefront or a front in Berthoud, I probably have them in my database. And other projects, we're still working on the broadband. No, we've talked about broadband. I think we brought that back to you almost a year ago now. It's not dormant, or it's gone, and I can't say it's dormant. We're looking at another alternative. And so what we found through the 4 communities, for those of you, let me just back up. Milliken, Meade, Johnstown, and Berthoud came together last year, pretty much about this time, and decided that maybe if we all 4 of us got together and tried to solicit a broadband provider to come into our community by community, I mean the 4 communities, we might have a better chance of doing that than individually. We were successful in that regard, but it so happens that the business or the company that we decided that responded to the RFP process, we thought did a good job, could meet all of our needs, all of our requirements. So happens when it got down to the fine print, that wasn't necessarily the case. And so at this point, or a few months ago, we decided to look at other alternatives. Us, for Berthoud, we've been talking to Loveland Pulse, and we still are. We had a great meeting with Loveland Pulse by us, the 4 communities now back, just before Christmas. And it was a very productive. It was the first time, I think, and I can say this if my other colleagues were here, we felt really confident that we can make this happen. So there's still a lot of things we need to do with Loveland Pulse, with Larimer County, but all the parties involved are pretty interested in making that happen. And so we have another meeting, Chris and I have another meeting with Loveland County, or Larimer County Loveland Pulse, I think it's next week, to follow up on that discussion. So that's still moving forward. Our Sharp Local program, hopefully you are familiar with that. That was very successful. I think you got the emails from Stephanie and the updates from Stephanie. A short time we put together, I thought, a very good program. It was myself, Cindy, and Stephanie, with Chris's support, and Jeanette in Cindy's office. And I think you all saw for like $3,800, I think the town put in, it generated just in direct benefit over $50,000 going back to the Berthoud businesses. And there's also that indirect benefit as well, but that's something we could track. The business retention, just real quick, I'll touch on that in a minute. The business attraction, I stay in touch. First of all, there's a group in Northern Colorado called READY, Regional Economic Development Initiative. It's myself, all of my colleagues in Northern Colorado, plus Upstate Colorado and Larimer County. We meet monthly. Upstate Colorado has taken the lead on this initiative because they have the resources to do it. We support their efforts, and they go out and promote all of Northern Colorado on behalf of all the communities. I stay in touch with Metro Denver EDC, the state of Colorado, Site location consultants, that's where I do stay in touch with, I can't say all of them because there's a lot out there, but those that I think that I know over the years that I think might have a project for us, that would be a good fit for Berthoud. And then the commercial brokers. Commercial brokers from pretty much all of Metro Denver North, I stay in touch with on a regular basis. Either I go to Denver, attend some of their meetings or whatever whatever activity that I think they're gonna be at, or through my email outreaches to them. I tend to email them when I have something of newsworthy. For me, it could be newsworthy, for them it could be not, but I just use it as an excuse to stay in touch, to put something in their inbox from Berthoud, from Walton. I can't say it's proven to be, the thing that has proven to be is me staying in touch. So when I contact them, they know I'm Berthoud, and they know I'm Walt. I haven't received a project from them yet, but you just never know. Any questions about that? Oh, give you an idea. This is a little brochure. It's on the line. I email this out too, but if I'm meeting with a retailer in Denver or in northern Colorado or Las Vegas, I take this along with me. I tend to keep it because I don't want it, but then I follow up with an email. But in here are all of our sites, retail sites, with the data that backs it up. It's the number of people within so many miles, the average daily traffic on the roads that, close proximity to the site. This gives them a good visual of the sites that we're talking about. And I'll follow that up with an email. Also, in the bottom right-hand corner, that's our website. One of the things that I have on our website is a listing of all of our sites and buildings. It's all there. And I try to keep that as current as I possibly can. The other thing that's really important about that site, though, is the demographics. It's embedded with, can't think of the software. Esri data is embedded in our website, and they keep it updated. And so Esri is a well-known software package. It's used by others throughout the country. So when they see Esri Esri data, it's pretty credible data. But that's another advantage of having this on our website. The Regional Economic Development Initiative, that's what this is all about. I think we do all of our business retention activity as a region. So when I go out and call on a Berthoud company and I have these questionnaires, it goes into the database. I come back and input it, or they can go online themselves and input the data. At our business executive briefing, that you and Chris Ratt, we had these little survey cards. We had, I think, 6 or 7 companies respond. It's inputted, because then we can evaluate the responses from a regional perspective. So those of us, like whether in northern Colorado, my colleagues and I, then we look at that data and see how we discuss how as a region can we support our existing businesses in northern Colorado. And then moving right, feel free to ask any questions, by the way, but moving right along, just gives you an idea of the sites, not only that are available in Berthoud, but I keep on our website. They're in this book that I take with me on the road, and I try to keep this as current as possible. This is Heron Lakes entrance, Heron Point Commercial, Berthoud Parkway, West Side Crossing out at the intersection of 287 and 56. That's an interesting development. As Chris knows, we meet with the developer on a regular basis, and Chris more so than I. We think it's a great site, but with not all the sites, but some sites, there are some challenges that the developer and the owner have to overcome before we can really get involved, and I think that's where we are right now with West Side Crossing. Although there's interest being expressed in that, and that used to be the site where Safeway, for those who've been around here, where Safeway was going to locate. And there's a lot of interest in trying to attract another grocery store to that site. And I've spoken to most of the grocery store real estate people. The site is nice, but the demographics are not there yet for us to attract a significant grocer to that site. And They're aware of that, we're aware of that, and, but we're not to say, never say never. So we're still talking to grocers like Natural Grocers, Whole Foods, Lucky's Market, things like that would be a niche for Bertha that we think might be of
What's the
interest.
target demographic that they're looking for?
Pardon me?
What's the target demographic they're looking
Each one is a little bit different. I'll show you a slide of that. Like, when I went down and met with, just as an example, and this was a few years ago. Might have changed a little bit, but I don't think so. Met down and met with King Supers, the real estate in Denver, the real estate person. She was very familiar with the site. There's a King Supers up in Loveland, and there's a Walmart right down here. What they didn't want to do was, they don't see themselves at that point locating it just as a King Supers on that site, because people in North Berthoud may come to this King Supers versus the Loveland King Supers, and they're not really growing their pie by doing that. They're just taking people that would normally go to Loveland to Berthoud, which for us is good, but they don't see it that way. So each retailer is a little bit different,
Maybe a Trader Joe's, just throwing it out there, maybe.
maybe.
We hear that all the time.
Sprouts,
National Groceries, all those.
You know, Sprouts is an interesting one. They're very much like 100,000 kind of population store. So, you know, they don't open in small markets, and they, you know, most of those national brands have very specific site criteria. And they don't bend on those unless they really feel strongly there's a good reason to. And most of those specialty stores like Trader Joe's and Sprouts requires, you know, 10 times the population that we have today.
Lucky's likes college towns, and they just also been bought in by King Supers, so it's
Yeah.
got a big hand in their pocket, so.
Trader Joe's doesn't publish their site selection criteria, or at least they didn't used to. I haven't looked in a while, but
They don't. I mean, I've emailed, I've contacted them, and I mean, they'll give you,
yeah, if you think about where they're all located, they're all located in a lot bigger places than we are. Yeah.
and I'm gonna touch on this, and that's a good question, Tim, but just another, you guys are talking, I mean, I say you, sorry, the board. You know, these are I-25, the big Citerians out there. I know you're discussing the Metro District policy, but there's other sites out there as well.
Can you hold that slide real quick?
Yep.
The 90 and 70, oh, that's Ursa Major with where the 90 and 70 are?
Yes.
That's the tech area?
Ursa Major's on the 90 acres.
Okay.
Bertha Tech Center is the 70 acres behind it.
And, okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, the Loves is the 110 and then above it, that's vacant right now?
Correct, the
Okay.
60 acres is right on, we've had, Chris and I have met with, along with our community development department, with a couple of interested parties and somewhat interested in the 80 acres and 60 acres to put a development on those sites, and they just haven't pulled the trigger yet. There are some issues with both of those.
And with the 40, is that still campus?
Ames,
Ames, okay.
In the 80s where the Tractor Supply used to be, right?
it's 60. Yes, no, I'm sorry, the 80. You're right.
It's the
80.
60s owned by Markham. That's Markham Farms.
No, it's
isn't
a gentleman out of Loveland,
Oh, okay, I thought that was
Markham Farms is farther north.
it's farther north.
okay, I thought it came clear down to the interstate.
We've met with companies, I think once the interchange is done, maybe, there'll be more interest. I mean, it'll generate more interest, but, there's just easier sites to develop up and down 25 than those two sites.
And that little sliver to the west of the 40 acres, that's the parking lot for the,
To your question, Tim, this is what you often, when I go to, there's one event that a lot of us go to, it's in Las Vegas, the ICSC. I think Chris went a few years ago with me. When you walk around to these national retail, they often have on their desk, on their, a one-pager, a handout that says what their site location criteria is. And this is just two of them. Just gives you an idea. To Chris's point, they don't deviate from this all that much. You know, when I'm out trying to attract a manufacturer, which I do is I sell the region. You know, we're close proximity to the community colleges, Ames and Front Range, and CSU and CU, and there's a population within so many miles that you can draw from, central location. When it comes to retailers,
tighten that up.
Oh, they, very much so. It's within, like, these are within 5 minutes, some are 5 miles. The McDonald's is gonna locate up here at Heron Lakes. It's 5 minutes of that McDonald's. So the retailers are, and you can try to convince them, which I do. I try to, like, I show them numbers like that, which, I mean, that's just, and they have those as well. I mean, they've got all that stuff. But when I go there and I explain to them the growth and I show them the growth and all that, that at least opens up a door, but they don't deviate too much from this kind of criteria, even with incentives. I mean, it helps, but this is pretty common practice for the retailers, national retailers.
What's ADT?
Average daily traffic?
Okay, so 35,000 they want. Average daily traffic at that area or downtown or?
Usually on the main road
On
in
the
front of
main
the, in front of the business.
In front of the business.
And so just for context, like 287 from Mountain to up to 14 is about 20,000, right? So I mean 35,000 is a lot of traffic.
Mhm. So leading up to this, so my activity in 2022 at 37, I track all of this data, by the way. I mean, I have a software package that tracks all this stuff. I had 37 inquiries, primarily manufacturers. 2 were preliminary, that means we're still talking. 35, you go, well, that's a lot to eliminate. Most of these inquiries were for large tracts of land, or they were significant water users, or we didn't have a site that met their criteria, or a building to meet their criteria, one or the other. We don't have pretty much any buildings in town for a manufacturer to locate in, and so that makes it difficult. So it just depends on their criteria and whether we, and I respond to all of them, because once again, I'm responding and it's a way to keep Bertha's name out there, let them know that we're interested, that kind of thing, but we just, and I'll touch on this in a few minutes, but we have land, and I have a slide, but I might as well just talk about this now. Chris is very much aware of this. A good example is Jackson Industrial Site on First Street. For those of you who've been in town, it's a beautiful site. It's flat, utilities are all around it. You got a railroad siding going up, so if you're a manufacturer, you might be able to get a spur off of that, although we had BNSF on the site. It's a challenge for the main line to come off the line onto that site. But it can be done for the right amount, for the right company and the right amount of money, I guess. But that's a good example in that it's a tough sell to market that site, because one of the reasons, not the only reason, one of the reasons is the owner wants to sell the whole thing. Doesn't want to break it up. Doesn't want to be a developer. So now I have been looking for somebody who needs 58 acres. If they want to take 40 acres, I think Mr. Jackson would be interested, something like that. So, but I'm really marketing along with their broker. I mean, LC Real Estate has been marketing that as the listing for that site. A whole 58 acres, knowing full well that Mr. Jackson is not all that interested in breaking it up into smaller tracts, which I thought would be a great idea, because we have a number of small businesses, and I've spoken to that would love to expand and need to expand. Maybe not so much now because of the economy, but had interest in building another 5,000 square foot building or moving into a 10,000 square foot building. And we often thought that site would be ideal for that. You can come up from the south, or you can come in from the north too, but it lends itself to that, but it's not gonna work.
So he wants all at once, so it'd be a big office.
Or he sells it to somebody, or a developer that somebody else will take that on and develop it.
Okay,
Yeah.
I see.
Mhm. And for a long time, I know we've had some discussions with a gentleman who wants to develop Ludlow Farms. It's been the same way with Ludlow Farms for all these years. That's been on the market a good number of years. Long before I got here, it was on the market, but I think it was similar, that Mr. Ludlow, he was not interested in being a developer. It's 300 acres. It's another beautiful site, great views, right along 287, 56. But it took this person, I think from Florida, to come up and he's looking at purchasing the whole thing, mixed use development on that site. So it's gonna work hopefully it works in the long term, but that's kind of the thing we're looking at for the Jackson Industrial Site. Now with the First Street
First Street overlay.
Innovation District, that site, lends itself to that kind of development, we think. So once that gets farther down the road, and there's some other issues there that we can take care of, but that site lends itself to something like that, provided that somebody else ends up purchasing that site.
Well, before we move on, I think this is probably a reasonable point to make here. You can disagree with me, although I don't think you will. I think most of the inquiries that we get are looking for existing building space.
Yeah.
I would say the vast majority of inquiries. The same is true with everybody except for national retailers. But we get the question a lot, like, well, why don't we have some of these cool independent restaurants that have 1 or 2 locations in northern Colorado? Why don't they expand in Berthoud? And the simple answer is there's no place for them to go. And they don't have the capital to go out and spend a few $1 million to build a new restaurant. And so they need existing space, and we just don't have any. And the same is true with manufacturing in particular. I would say the vast majority of inquiries that we get through upstate Colorado or through the state of Colorado or other places, they're looking for existing building space. Every once in a while you get one, an inquiry that's like, hey, we're gonna invest $200 million and, build 1 million square feet and whatever. Those are super rare and a lot of times, at least in my experience, a lot of those are just poking around too. It's like they don't feel that serious and they don't ever seem like they come to fruition anywhere, so.
Yeah, except they're on DIA right now.
Yeah. I mean, there are locations where people are making those kinds of investments.
Yes, yeah, around the airport right now, there's a lot of them going on there.
But that's pretty unusual in
It
person.
is, so Chris is right. The majority of our requests, not ours, but are for existing facilities. Time is of the essence for them. So it's easier to move into an existing building, costs are generally lower, and for them to move up and get operational relatively quick.
Therefore, would it be worthwhile and at least exploring the idea of building available commercial space by the town, essentially to kind of put it there, or is that
I
way
will-
too complicated?
We talked about
We
it.
could do it. I can assure you it will not go over well.
With who?
With the local business community. I've had several local businesses. I actually made a comment one time in a business meeting with local businesses. Like, man, it'd be a lot easier if the town was just the commercial developer. Like, we would take the risk and just build space. And they went, I was gonna say ballistic, that's probably unfair. They were not happy. I got chewed out and I was like, whoa, I was just throwing out, it would be nice. Not even like, hey, we have plans to do that, but there's very much a sentiment, we don't want the public sector competing with us. Even
public.
businesses, yeah, I mean, right, like,
Well, we're kind of doing that
You know,
right now. Like, is there, so I've heard
we
from,
are and we're not.
I've heard a different opinion, but this
Yeah.
is retail of people that want to expand.
Yep.
So it would be Oh, that's a great point. I just thought, Second Street's got a lot of steel sheds. If we could put up some pads and steel sheds and say, over 10 years, you improve this, that would make some angry.
Yes, they don't want us in the commercial real estate business, and I'm not sure we should be in the commercial real estate business, right? I mean, there's good reasons why towns don't get into commercial real estate.
There has been interest.
I think that should be explored, and I think they should come to meetings, really, but I think we wouldn't be the landlord, we would just sell it to that business with some kind of an agreement.
I do think there are ways that we can facilitate
Yeah,
commercial development. We just don't wanna be in the commercial real estate development business ourselves, right? But I think those are the kinds of conversations we should be having, which is how do we facilitate and incentivize the creation of new space? Cause it is risky in a town like Berthoud, it just is, right? If I had $10 million and I was gonna invest in commercial real estate and I could choose between, Fort Collins, Windsor, or Berthoud would probably be at the bottom of the list because we're small. We don't have a huge population, we don't have a roaring retail economy, so there's a lot more risk for somebody to come and make a significant investment here than there is in other places.
There's a few concerns I've heard is just the cost.
Yep.
Just the paperwork trail before you even get to build the building, those costs are pretty high is what I've been told.
There's truth to that, and time in particular is one of the biggest limiters. And I think Walt will agree with me on this as well. We've talked to a couple different real estate developers and real estate brokers. And we've asked, just like, hey, if we wanted to help encourage commercial development in Berthoud, from your perspective, what would be the best thing we could do? Like, is it, fee waivers, is it whatever? And I think to a person, they've all said the same thing, which is the best thing you can do is make your development process as easy as possible. That, if I'm a commercial developer or a commercial business and I wanna build something, there's, the time value of money is important. And the longer I have to sit on that money and wait and hope I'm gonna recoup my investment, the more risky it becomes. And so if I got money and I wanna spend it and I wanna invest it in commercial real estate, I wanna do that as fast as possible. I think that's the consistent message we've heard.
It's almost like we need to put together a plan like we did for our broadband, streamline the permitting process to get a building put in, but not sacrifice, looks and aesthetics to make sure it matches what we want.
I think there's truth to that, yeah.
Yep, and I think we could do that relatively easy, and we would do that, I mean,
I think we try to do that already
Yes,
within the context of the guidelines we already have. And I will say, I think we've gotten feedback a few times, like, hey, you guys are super easy to work with. That's typically on a lot by lot basis, right? Because all that's done administratively here. So when you have a commercial site plan on a piece of ground that already has utilities and zoning, you can come in, it's mostly a site plan review administratively, we check it against the code, we look at your architecture, you go through building plan review, and you're ready to go. Where it really bogs down though is in the development process. Rezoning, creating new lots, building infrastructure, that could be more efficient than it is today.
So that, dragging power, water, sewer and streets out. I know First Street, there's that giant property, I think it might be the Jackson Farm, the one that's essentially like a whole bunch of really small slivered.
That's the Jackson property.
Yeah. Cool concept, but I know if I was to build a business, I would look at that and go, what the hell? And walk away. Maybe it's worth it for us to essentially throw some money down, essentially knowing that whoever signs and ties into this, they pay us back over time. And at least putting some of the skeleton pieces in place, because what I'm hearing is it's cyclical. I mean, we've got a lot of the great stuff already here, but there's no retail space. There's no retail space because there's nothing available, because nobody wants to come and risk it. So if we build it, then it might lower that threshold. My concern is, hypothetically, 2 really big subdivisions is gonna change this dynamic a lot. And we're gonna have bigger players that can throw more money around and command more lot space that might drive out more local business that could use that space. Essentially, they're able to buy the lot that, somebody who's local, who's been wanting to do it for a while, finally has, interest from a bank that can do it. They can't compete, they'd lose in a bidding war. So maybe we can help kind of level that playing field by drawing power, water, and whatever we need out to those, just to make that entry bar lower. I mean, obviously, I don't wanna get into the business of building commercial buildings, but the flip side is, we already know that whatever is built by us is up to code. It's up to our standard, and
I think the primary concern with extending infrastructure is twofold. One is the cost, right? And we're doing that kind of speculatively in areas where we already have other infrastructure demands that we need to address. Like building infrastructure on the Jackson industrial site is probably the best example, right? It won't help level the playing field in the sense that we'll actually make those lots more valuable. Because now it's easier to construct, right? Right now, there's some significant limitations to that site that it requires significant investment. If we eliminate that, then those become more valuable and more attractive. And so I don't know that it's that
I'm
It's that-
backpedal, that's what I meant.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I think it's still shed, but I think us building anything to a finished state, yeah, I could see people getting angry with that, but if we say we'll put up the beginning, you improve over 10 years, like, I can't see any business 100 years ago being able to do our finished standards, but they started out with a facade and slowly worked their way up. It just seems like I don't wanna get ahead of you, Walt, but
no, it's good, it's a
It's a
good
good
discussion.
conversation.
Yeah, it is. That's why we wanna do this.
Yeah.
And I think, to Chris's point, we work pretty well, I think. Of course, I work here, so I could be a little biased, with the developers. I know we had, a few years back, we had interest in the Jackson site. And we put together a really nice incentive package on the table that covered things like the infrastructure. We just lost out to Windsor on that one.
Yep.
Because it was easier, that's the site in Windsor was easier accessible than this site. Even though you might, but anyway, so we can put together a nice package internally to make that site, make any site attractive. Now, there's interest, you know, the Weibels own the 23 acres north of the Jackson Industrial site. And they are talking about on those two sites, 5 acres fronts First Street and 18 acres is on Clayton Place. On that site, they're talking about putting in those 5,000 square foot industrial buildings, much like we have on Second Street. So you have a number of tenants in those buildings. There's some things that are, there's water, not issues with water up there, but they have to run the water up there, and we're talking to them about that. But that would take care of that 5,000 square feet of space, that if the business wants to expand, boom, they can go right up there. And I know Chris and Ken have had numerous meetings with Jay and the ownership about how we could run that water line and loop it from 10E. So I don't think that there's any barriers from our perspective in terms of being willing to and able to work with a business that wants to go on any one of these sites. As Chris alluded to, I sit in, or not alluded, stated, the community development department, I usually sit in on their meetings with businesses and developers, and more than once, somebody will go, you guys are pretty darn easy to work with compared to A, B, C, and D. Because they'll ask, well, when can we resubmit, or when will you get back to us? 2 weeks, a week, 2 weeks. And for a lot of these larger communities, that's not the case. For us, it can be. And so there is some built-in incentive, I wouldn't even call them incentives, but just the way we work with businesses to get them up in place, operational, as quickly as we possibly can. If there is a delay, which there often is, quite frequently, not all the time, it's on them submitting the plans that we need to get to continue the process. But I think overall, we do a pretty darn good job addressing the needs of the businesses to help them get up operational relatively quick. Of course, I'm biased, I work here, but I would say that, listening to them and seeing our community development department in action, I would say, yeah, I would agree to that. Just a few other things on this slide, you'll see a number of other, 2 photographs. Last year, we initiated a program for the entire Small Business Week. The mayor participated, Chris participated. We visited a number of businesses. We had the breakfast. So we have something lined up all during Small Business Week to say to our existing businesses, hey, we appreciate you being in Berthoud. Is there anything we can do? And I think with the mayor and Chris going out, along with myself, and meeting with the business, they've really appreciated that. We had the bottom photos, our executive briefing that we had just before Christmas. I think we had 10 businesses at that, I think. It was a nice turnout, just a way for us to say thank you, but also Chris and the mayor did a presentation on our 2023 budget, just to update them on our budget, significant projects, and then we listened. Do they have any issues? And Chris got a few, but that's why we do this. We want to just listen to them, see if they have any issues with the town, or if they have a concern, or if they have a need. That is a great time. It's very informal for them to raise that with us at that point. Granted, I'm also going out throughout the course of the year asking these same questions, but here it's very informal. They get to also meet some of their other businesses in town that they may not been able to meet with. And then, as I said, I keep data. Everything that I track, everything you can see from these. Should get my glasses. From these charts, by industry. I need my glasses. But that would give just, I'm not gonna go through all this, let's just give you an idea of how I track my data. This is just 3 of the pie charts, but everything that comes in, we do track. We talked about this, there's a Jackson Industrial Site, another chart just to the locations the businesses are looking at. And then I stay in touch with LC Real, with all the commercial brokers. When they have a listing, I put that up on our website. I stay in touch and I help promote that listing with and for them. My job is to help them I tell them this, my job is to help them make money, because it benefits both of us. Last but not least, of course, the Old Town Hall site. I think Chris will talk about that, maybe not so much now, but there's progress is being made on that site. We found a little glitch, but I think we've worked through that. And hopefully we'll bring something back to you in a month or so. And I think that, any more questions?
I like the revision of that. That's new compared to the barn looking building, with the flat top roof.
That's actually the original,
Yeah, that's what it
the
says,
barn
the
was the
first
vision.
iteration.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
So, I don't wanna press this point too hard, but would the businesses that are talking to you have a problem with what we're doing here?
No, because we won't be developing the site, right?
Okay. But we're helping out.
Yeah, and I
Pretty
think in
significant.
areas where we can, this is a piece of property the town has owned and been.
Oh, right, okay, we're just kinda.
And
like
so,
going
so
out.
so we're facilitating in that way, and there are a lot of really good examples throughout northern Colorado. And I think during the Downtown Development Authority discussion, this is probably a really good segue.
Yes.
Where the public agencies have helped to either buy and consolidate land, and then partner with developers, or with DDAs to see that land redeveloped.
Gotcha, okay.
Yes.
That's different than us building commercial space ourselves.
And this is a good example too, and Mike can talk about what's happening in Loveland, but you see this site, of course, the grain elevator and that's next to this. Well, this, hopefully this does progress, is motivating the Giselles to redevelop that grain elevator.
Gishels.
Gissels. Thank you. And so this is not just this site, and this is gonna be a catalyst for this whole area, I believe. And we're pretty excited about the project. So with that, I think it's a good segue. If there are any more questions?
I had a couple.
Yeah, go ahead.
For out on 287 and 56, is anything besides a grocery store being focused on, or
Oh,
has
yeah,
there been?
yes. There's a number of other
Out of
sites.
curiosity, what kind of
No, it's a
major buildings are
Well, there's nothing, we haven't seen anything major. In fact, I don't think they've submitted anything yet, but they're having a difficult time attracting a grocery store to that big box site, which is the largest site on this development.
Is it just grocery anchor that they're looking for? or
No,
looking for
they've
other-
talked to a handful of other retail businesses that might take a 30,000 square foot building. You think there's a whole bunch of different kind of similar businesses. I don't wanna give any away.
Yeah, I didn't want
Yeah,
names,
yeah.
just like kinds of different kinds of things.
like
besides
hardware and farm and ranch stores and grocery, pharmacy. They're trying to look for, and some of those don't really need as big of a box as what they had planned. And so they've come in and asked, what we think the board's appetite might be for modifying their original preliminary plat, or their final plat, to break that into 2 smaller sites. So still larger boxes than really anything else we have in town, but a lot smaller than what they had planned. Because they've had a really difficult time.
Kinda like how they
finding
split up the
a
old
tenant
Hobby
of that
Lobby up
size.
north, they split it into 2 or 3.
Smaller
Smaller
suites, yeah.
Wasn't Prairie Star supposed to have a big box on it, if I recall correctly?
They had a smaller, kind of similar footprint to West Side Crossing, not like something like, when you think of the King Super Shopping Center in Loveland, for instance, on Eagle, nothing of that magnitude. Something a lot smaller, probably similar to what we're talking about at where we're at now, like the Hayes Market Shopping Center. It was more of that scale in Prairie Star.
So we have essentially two similarly sized box stores with minor amounts of interest, but no major bites from anybody yet. Are having both of those available, kind of making it,
Actually, Prairie Star has quite a bit of interest on their commercial pads, and we're working with them to overcome some sewer challenges they have, we've talked about already. And I think we've identified how to solve that problem in the short term.
And there are two different sites, if you think about it. One, like Prairie Star has a development around, they have a town center plan for that. This is a standalone commercial site. Not to say there's pros and cons to both, but I mean, but they're different sites.
And there's actually more traffic at Berthoud Parkway and 287 than there is at Mountain and 287. Because you have all that traffic coming southbound off of Berthoud Parkway. It's mostly level and it's regional traffic, but it's a little more attractive site. It's part of the reason why the Heron Lakes commercial project went pretty fast. And they actually have, I think, they've submitted a plan for almost every lot out there, and I think they have, the one that they haven't yet, they've got some potential there. So that project went really quick. But we're also in what I call the gas station and fast food phase of retail development.
Yes.
And maybe this is the world according to Chris, but like I believe that, you know, you go through like different stages, and the first phase of retail development is like, you know, small local retail, and then you hit like national pizza chains. And that's like that's you've taken a step up, and then you get to like gas stations and fast food.
where does Napa stores and auto repair shops?
Yeah, sorry, auto repair and pizza. I actually left out auto repair, that's part of my philosophy. It's auto repair and pizza.
Yep.
And then it's gas stations and fast food. And then after that, you get some fast casual kind of dining opportunities, maybe some small box stores. But it's kind of weird how, like, we get inquiries all the time for auto parts, gas stations, drive-through fast food, but that's it. Like, nobody else is at all remotely interested. And so it's just kind of an interesting dynamic. But that didn't even occur until just in the last 2 or 3 years. Before that, good luck getting any national retail brand interested. And so, you know, we hit that kind of population threshold and traffic threshold now it's popping up on everybody's radar.
Are there any channels for smaller to medium size, like just Colorado-based businesses that are looking to expand?
Yep, I I'm working that's a whole different conversation, sort of, but I mean, in terms of me communicating with them. But yes, when I stay in touch, or I scour the newspapers, when I see something, there's indirect discussions with a potential restaurant out in Longmont, trying to entice them to come up. They're expanding, and I think this site would be ideal for them. And so that's why I say if you have ideas, if you read something, if you go, hey, well, have you talked to, because there's a lot of small business, especially restaurants out there. Please send them my way.
And we'll get comments sometimes like, hey, I went to this awesome brewery and restaurant down in Boulder, how come you guys haven't reached out to them yet? And it's like, well, there's 1,000 businesses like that in northern Colorado. But if you have a lead, tell us, we'll track it down.
I think we have some great things that others don't. I think we just gotta incentivize them somehow.
Yeah.
Great Wolf Lodge, I'll give up on that one.
Yeah, but
Administrator Kirk, I don't think we're gonna hit our 8 PM deadline. I don't know
yeah,
if the trustees wanna get through the DDA before we ask more questions, or
That's a good call. We should probably do that due to weather.
that was the original idea. I should have said that at the beginning, but Chris wanted us out at 8, and I agree. I have to walk a whole block.
You poor thing.
I think, you know, you guys have the right to decide how long you wanna stay. It's of no consequence to me, it's easy for me to get home.
I think you have the longest, actually, no, we have a lovely person.
We have some guests here that I wanna be respectful of, and they've taken the time out of their
Absolutely.
days to come and present to us. Grateful to have them, and wanna make sure they have time to present and talk about what.
And you can always ask, give me a call, drop me an email anytime,
Catch you walking downtown.
walking downtown, yep. So, I'd like to transition, if that's okay, Mayor.
Absolutely.
Mike Scholl and Sean Hawkins. Mike is with Ayers and Associates. Mike is also, used to work for the city of Loveland and knows the development that took place downtown. He was involved in all of that. So I asked Mike, and he agreed to come in and give you all an update, or not an education of what a DDA is, what it does, why we may want to consider it. And Sean is here to share with you, he runs the DDA up in Loveland, share with you his experience and not only running that, but others. So I think it's a good team, and I'll turn it over to Mike.
Great, welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Walt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, trustees. Again, my name is Mike Scholl. I'm with Ayers Associates. I do live in Loveland. And just a little bit of background, I was hired by Loveland in 2008 to do the downtown redevelopment, and I did, the Foundry was kind of the big project, but we did the Art Space project, the Rialto, and also the Sprouts, if you want to talk about grocery store development, which I know we were having conversations for 4 years with the Sprouts before that even saw the light of day. And of course, it never comes out. I think they just dropped in, but so I have a lot of experience in Northern Colorado, but I've kind of shifted over to the private sector. Actually, Sean, we worked together for a little while when we helped set up the DDA and brought him on. He's just amazing and knows his stuff backwards and forwards. But I work for Ayers Associates. We have our office in Fort Collins and Cheyenne, and we do work municipal planning and economic development. In my division, we work everywhere from Lamar to we're doing a lot of work in Craig, all up and down the Front Range, and even in a lot of work in Wyoming. So we have a range of experience. Just kind of go through these quickly. We were actually, my colleague Joshua Hava was gonna come. He had worked with the Windsor DDA, but because of weather, I think he decided to kind of to stay home, so I hope that's okay. And like I said, we do everything from a lot to the Main Street, work with a lot of on-call staff. Actually, I do a workshop for communities called How to Think Like a Developer, helping communities kind of understand kind of how they can kind of think and act like developers, among other things. And again, the Windsor DDA, actually, we had managed the Windsor DDA under contract up until actually a couple weeks till January, but we managed the DDA for them for 7 years. And kind of we recently parted. I think they wanted to go in a different direction, and I think it made a lot of sense at that point. But we had 7 years of managing the Windsor DDA through our firm as well. And so just give you kind of a little bit of kind of who we are and our experience. And so when I talked to Walt, the way he asked us to frame it is just kind of look at it like an intro of what is a Downtown Development Authority, what does it do, why is it valuable, understanding kind of, that this is kind of a new concept, perhaps something you may want to pursue as a community, and kind of understanding kind of what you can do with it. So just starting at the very beginning, the DDAs, there are about 16 or so in the state of Colorado. It goes back to the 1960s. A couple things, and I'll talk, because I know kind of urban renewal and DDAs get kind of interchanged a little bit. There's some nuances, some difference. One of the big ones is you can only have one DDA in your town. You can have an urban renewal authority, and you can have a lot of different project areas, but you can only have one DDA. And that's a big difference, and the focus has to be on, according to state statute, on the central business district, so there has to be some tie-in, so it's a little more specific, a little more narrow focused.
So it has to be one area, it can't be our entire town is a business
Yeah,
district,
I
it has
mean,
to be like a street.
Yeah, or there has to be some tie-in, in terms of when you define those boundaries and stuff. Urban renewal generally, you do the entire community, and then you set up, with DDA, you have to have just a single one within the focus point of the central business district, so. So just in looking kind of the legislative, I'm not an attorney, but kind of go through just basic legislative intent, halt the prevention of deterioration in property values within the business district, the blighted areas, which I always love, whoever came up with blight it's a hot button term whenever you talk about it. It's a legal term of art, really, but when people see it, there's a kind of a bit of a knee-jerk reaction when you say, well, you're designating my area blight, but it's very confusing, and I think, but it really, it's a legal term of art. We've done kind of project area designations, and you're looking at things for like aging infrastructure, buildings that have environmental conditions like asbestos and lead paint, things like that are typical you're going to find in older communities or older parts of communities when you're defining kind of what that means, what the conditions that allow you to kind of establish a DDA. that's just the basic, understanding kind of what the state, the law, the statutes state, is how you need to define it for purposes of creating a DDA. So real quick, I mean, these are the steps. The first step you need to do if you're contemplating is complete a plan of development, establish the boundaries, the legal boundaries, and identify potential projects, that you're looking at. Now, when you start to think about kind of establishing the boundaries and projects, it's not prescriptive. If you go forward and you decide not to do the projects, you're not bound by that. But I think for transparency and kind of how the law is written, you have to at least establish kind of to the public, this is what we're thinking about using it for. You have to submit it to the Planning Commission for review. The issues with the Planning Commission, they don't have veto authority. It's a simple review process. Sometimes we've run into issues where planning commissions think they have veto power and they don't. It's more it's a courtesy review, but it's really the town board who submits the question to the voters. The key difference, again, with an urban renewal is you can set up an urban renewal without going to the voters, fairly easy as a town board. With a DDA, it requires a vote of the voters and the property owners and those with a leasehold interest within the district as you define it. So it's a little bit different, and I think if you are contemplating an election, it makes sure kind of the clerk is involved early to help define because it's not just, you don't just go to the voter rolls and pull the voter rolls of the people who live in the district. If I have a lease, even if I live in Loveland, if I'm leasing a business in your downtown, I have the right to vote under the way I have a leasehold interest. So there has to be a process for submitting an affidavit to get a ballot to be able to vote on the DDA board. So it takes a little bit more effort to kind of get than you would kind of a typical municipal election. There are two different elections, potentially three that you would need to do. One is a formation. Formation election you can do, it's calls a special election whenever. That's really just the first step. The second step is your Tabor election. There's two parts to it. One is allows you to kind of issue debt through the DDA. That one you have to do because it's a Tabor election, you have to do it on in November. And again, it gets a little wonky because typical November election, you've got your vote people that are able to vote, but then you also have this other universe of people who are eligible to vote on just the DDA. So you just have to be mindful of that. And then the second election that you can do is you can raise the mill levy up to 5 mills, generally for operation and maintenance. So you can both use the tax increment, which I have a little bit of a primer if we want to get into that. And you can have a mill levy, which, it's a 5 mills for the properties within that you can use to kind of hire staff and manage. And I think that's an important point. I'll revisit that a little bit further on. But once that's approved, once you have the DDA is formed, you have the Tabor election, then you can start identifying projects, issuing debt, making investment, and entering into contracts. It has a lot of the power that you would expect for kind of a special district, within the state of Colorado. So I'm running through these fast. I just wanted to pause for a second if there's any questions about what I've run through so far.
Appoint the board, would that be appointed by us or would that be
Yes.
by election?
Yeah, so, and actually, I think that might be we talk about that. So the board is, was it 7 to 11, is that what it is? Or 5 to 11? 7, you can appoint between 7 and 11 board members. They have to have a property interest within the downtown. So it's really, the board is comprised of stakeholders, that people with an affected interest in what happens in the downtown. And you do, as the town board, do the appointments, just probably as you would any other board or commission. But they just have to make sure that whatever the applicants or the nominees for the positions are cleared, or that they can establish that they're eligible to serve on the board. So that there's a process you have to go through, or at least to check.
Okay. Last question for me at the moment. In terms of establishing boundaries of a DDA, say it's this one block, that's what we've established for it. The block goes and the DDA, it's all fine and good. If we wanted to continue that but move it elsewhere, would it have to be dissolved and then moved elsewhere? Or would that get put to the voters? It's kind of a technical question.
You know, that is a technical question, it's a good one. I know you can amend the plan of development to add that in, and I don't, do you recall if do you have to do an election to amend?
Properties?
To add properties in, or do you can?
The town board can do it, but by a petition of a property owner, but they have to be contiguous. So I wouldn't think of doing it in one block, I would make it a.
Oh, no, obviously it would be a reasonable section. I'm just thinking if it needed to move or shift somehow, how if we have to start this whole thing over again, which could take years sometimes depending. So that was it.
Yeah, you do I mean, I without getting kind of too deep into the weeds though, I think there's some kind of thought that goes into how you define the boundaries too and where the development opportunities would be. And part of it too is thinking about how you're impacting residential neighborhoods too. And I think when we set up the Loveland one 6 or 7 years ago, you know, we were looking kind of at the up through 287. And if you're familiar kind of with where the couplet is, where the little Taco John's is, there's a lot of kind of weird anti-residential along, and they weren't happy, I mean, in part because, and understandably so, because a DDA doesn't necessarily directly benefit a single family residence, but you know, not that they're gonna have, you know, we weren't looking at an additional mill levy, but you know, you have to be mindful of, you know, what the benefit that they're gonna receive and the motivation to kind of support a DDA. And so, you know, thinking about carefully, you know, drawing the boundaries to both to you know, to look at the commercial properties, but to identify potential future opportunities going forward. So again, I talked about this briefly, you know, DDA, you have the power to hire staff, retain legal counsel. You know, look at, you do have the right to do your planning, you know, to kind of bring planning and zoning. I've never seen that used, but you do have that right. And you also have the opportunity to acquire property, and I think you were having a little bit of a discussion and kind of to Walt, as he mentioned earlier, when we did the Foundry, we went and acquired 16 parcels, 15 different owners, about a year of my professional career kind of, but part of that was, you know, when you're thinking about doing larger development, you know, a developer's not gonna spend that much time, they're not gonna, you know, developers are looking for path of least resistance. I mean, that's how they operate. And if you want a significant development, and that was kind of when we were working on it, you know, a developer's not gonna go out and acquire 16 properties for hope that they might be able to put together a deal. We kind of had to do that ahead of time to kind of stage that project and led to the Foundry. So I you know, there was a lot that went into it, but you know, I one of the things I say when I teach the class, the thinking like a developer's, you know, if you control the real estate, you control your future. And so it's important to think about you know, where you can strategically do some acquisition so you can kind of control, you know, as a community. And as a community, you're in the forever business too. I mean, there's one real distinction with developers. You know, they take return thresholds on 4, 7, 10 years, 15 years. But, you know, for the town of Berthoud, you're gonna be in existence for 50, you know, your return happens for, you know, into forever. So I think, you know, thinking a little differently on some of those, I think is important when you're kind of putting together that vision for, you know, your community and for the downtown and economic development in general. So I think you kind of touched on this a little bit, but it's under the direct supervision of the board. Majority of the members appointed it's a majority of the members that you appoint shall reside in the downtown or have a property interest in. So essentially, at all time, a majority of the board will be comprised of folks that own property or have a property interest in your downtown. So it's an important, you know, for folks to understand that it's not, you know, you're not people outside kind of imposing their will on the downtown. It's really the downtown having control of their vision going forward and what will happen.
Question on that, sorry. Can single family homeowners be on the board?
If it's within the boundary of the DDA,
Is that required by state statute or no?
that
That a certain percentage of the board members be private individuals as opposed to business or commercial?
It's not that specific, I mean, it's kind of, it just says that it's appointed, have to reside or own property. So it's so it's kind of a bit vague, a little gray in that regard. And this is just kind of, I kind of put in some things to kind of consider, I think, when you're looking at it from my experience. I think Sean probably may have some other things that he'd like to add, but you know, DDAs they're more flexible than urban renewal authorities, but you know, you have to be careful because the elections can be challenging. And it's important to kind of identify the community champions and the stakeholders who I think really want to do it. I mean, I think I say this with due respect. If it's the idea of the town board, it's a tougher sell than if it's the idea of the folks that kind of are in the downtown that choose to do it. So, you know, it's really important, I mean, understanding that this is a tool that you know that they may wanna pursue, but really it has to come from them as a group for it to be successful. And understand, I think one is be prepared to identify voters. I mean, it's always, you know, I've been in the municipal world, you know, in various levels and sectors for over 3 decades, and you know, they never get you on substance, they always get you on process. And so to the extent that you can make sure that you identify voters and have a process in place, I think is really important. You know, and make sure you engage with the clerk to understand how, you know, how folks can be part of that process. The other thing too is you wanna think about if you think about the DDA as kind of a startup entity, kind of in a business model, you need to be prepared to make some of those investments on the front end, I mean, as a community to support the growth of it over time before it can kind of get on its own feet. Cause the revenue's not gonna start rolling in on day one. And I think one of the things I'll give from my experience in Loveland as an example, I came in 2008, but the Loveland had set up the Urban Renewal Authority in the downtown, I believe, the project area in like 2001 or 2002. And there was this idea that we'll set it up and then all of a sudden revenue's gonna shoot up and it'll be great and everything will work, but no one was kind of captaining the ship. And then at the time, a lot of, the retail environment shifted out to the interstate, downtown declined, and then all of a sudden you're in the negative, and so now you don't really have, there's no one out there kind of pounding the pavement to try to find those opportunities to work with developers, and I think, and so, they brought me in 2008 and we had an urban renewal that was in deficit essentially, the base was, the current revenue collection was substantially about $250,000 below what the base had been in 2001. So we really had to work hard to kind of pull ourselves out of that. And I think when we did the DDA, I think the city council, they decided they were gonna take a portion of what the sales tax revenue that was collected in the downtown and apply it to the, basically grant it to we created the Downtown Partnership as the kind of umbrella management organization. And so, Sean came on board and we were able to kind of continue and identify development projects, do events and generate interest and keep things moving. And I think, they're at the point now where they're kind of gone from the startup to the scale up, and they're looking at being able to be a little bit more fiscally kind of independent, which I think is a good thing. The other thing to keep in mind from a project perspective is timing. 25 years seems like a long time. In the development world, it's not. And I think to the extent that if you're going to go set up a DDA, make sure you have some projects queued up so that you can start to drive the revenue right away. Again, going back to the example I gave with Loveland, when we created the urban renewal, there weren't projects queued up. And so, I just thought it would happen organically, but it doesn't. And so, to the extent that you have, the town hall site or something along those lines, that, where you're gonna go from public ownership to private, it's gonna drive the tax increment and kind of help allow you to do other things. And invest in other, facades and other redevelopment projects and infrastructure in the downtown. It's important so that you can maximize those 25, the 25-year revenue. And then I think, just a couple key differences. You know, the DDA, you've got 30 years with the 20-year extension, so you do have a good chunk of time, though. I think at certain points, the base revenue resets. You don't have to do a blight study, but you have to do a plan of development. You do have the opportunity for a mill levy, same thing, development, redevelopment focus. It is subject to TABOR. I mean, one of the big issues with urban renewal is you're not subject to TABOR, and I think that gives you some fiscal flexibility, but it's also, a lot of critics don't like it for that reason as well. Urban renewal has the power of eminent domain, DDAs do not. I haven't seen urban renewal use power of eminent domain, and this is Colorado. However, one of the things I've preached this to every community that I work in, just because you don't use eminent domain doesn't mean it can't be a good tool. And I think one of the things when you're looking to acquire property, you can do the acquisition in what we call under the threat of condemnation. And it's a kind of an arm's length transaction, but it allows the seller to take kind of substantial capital gains relief without having to go through the full process of doing eminent domain. It requires, I'm not an attorney, but it does require some legal, but it can be a motivating factor to help a seller kind of move forward, to kind of sell a property that they've been sitting on, and if especially what I found is in older downtowns where you've got legacy owners with properties that are fully depreciated, so they're looking at big capital gains hits when they sell, which kind of doesn't motivate them to sell. So if you can use tools like that to kind of help, it's just a little kind of trick of the trade that we use that with for the Foundry for a handful of those to help motivate sellers. And again, there's an election requirement that is required with the DDA, that I talked about earlier, that you don't have that same requirement with an urban renewal. I will say I'm not sure if I do. I had some extra slides just kind of going through the basics of what tax increment is, which I can kind of reference if you're interested, but if not, we could kind of pause and ask questions, and I think Sean is here as well if there's any questions you have for his experience in Loveland. Yes.
We got some other tricks. So it sounds like you do this for a living, Ears and Associates does?
Yeah,
From soup to nuts, all the way to really guide this.
yeah.
So if the town ever just decided to go out for a bid, is Ears and Associates is a Northern Colorado company that might be willing, and
Oh, yeah, we would definitely be.
I didn't even know this kind of thing existed where there's a private entity that helps manage that, so that sounds fantastic.
Yeah, we did it with Windsor for 7 years. We again through kind of, like I said, the kind of, we took them through the startup phase to the scale up phase, and then I think at this point, I think they're wanted to kind of move into a different direction, but I doing work now for the Cheyenne Urban Renewal Authority. We're on call for the Trinidad Urban Renewal Authority, and we've worked with a lot of other communities, both on within the DDA context and Main Street context as well to the state. So yeah,
Okay, thanks.
the benefit, and without kind of we can be fired more easily.
Or things get off the ground. I mean, I'm looking at this point by point thinking, oh, we should start there, but you do this for a living, and
Yeah.
kind of handy.
Well, and I think the benefit, I mean, I know this is not kind of a marketing for us as a firm, but the benefit is when you hire, that we were able to provide for communities is you're not hiring me, or you're hiring a firm, and we have a depth of expertise that we could pull from depending on what your needs are.
Yeah, and you're disinterested to where you might be looking at something where me being a resident might be emotional about an area, but you can kind of have this holistic view of this is really where you need to start.
Yeah, and we also, I mean, I think part of it is because we have reference from a lot of other projects and that kind of experience that we can kind of bring to the table. But yeah, and we also, I mean, do things like help educate the downtown businesses on kind of what, we could do workshops and things like that. Similar to what we're doing now with the businesses, to say, here's what a DDA is, here's what, here, what are some of those issues and concerns that you're looking at, kind of, so like you said, soup to nuts.
Awesome. Thanks.
You said there's 16 DDAs in Colorado.
Give or take, yeah.
Would you say that urban renewals are more or less common?
You know, I think, I think, and this is just my kind of more opinion, I think urban renewal authorities are more a function of developers and DDAs are more a function of communities. Urban renewal, and I don't think that it's not kind of true, universally true, but you know, Loveland has used urban, a lot of communities have used urban renewal, but DDAs are more of a, because there's a requirement that the, you know, the property owners are on the board, you can do other things with it like events and marketing and you have a lot more flexibility. DDAs tend to be, I think for a long term, it's a much better it's a much better kind of approach to doing downtown development authority than an urban renewal. But it's just, it's the start, you know, the startup cost with a DDA is a little bit higher than an urban renewal. And that's why I think, you know, they have a little bit better reputation, you know, because of how they've been used. You know, urban renewals, I think they've been used pretty extensively by developers. And so, you know, I think it's a, you know, across the state, I don't know, wouldn't you say, Sean, is that a fair?
In downtown, it's pretty much exclusively urban authorities, excuse me, DDA.
DDA.
You have a few crossovers in like Colorado Springs and larger areas that have a larger urban area that kind of filters into it, but it's, the DDA is a great tool. You gotta realize there's a couple of things you may not like though. You appoint the board, you approve the annual budget through your budget process. But after that, the board has powers under state statute. So when they make a decision, whether it's to put dollars into a certain, let's say they wanted to do a facade project, that doesn't come to you.
Sure.
And there's a few council members in Loveland that want that power, but we're not gonna give them because we think the tool works best when you have stakeholders guiding the process. And that's sort of this big difference there, but it is a really valuable tool, and I think you will see definitely in the next 10 years some major movement finally. Mike mentioned the urban renewal plan in Loveland. It was 17 years. Property tax or sales tax in 2002. And it wasn't until 2017 that it got back to that 2002 level. It's because they didn't do anything. So we are actively pushing it into projects that, and a lot of it's restoring older buildings, it's facade work, but you can do so many things with this tool. We can run fire suppression to a building, we can help bring it up to code. Just gotta develop policies that are within your plan of development. We ripped it off of Fort Collins, this isn't original, so we will look at any project and do up to 50% of the TIF that would generate over the life of the DDA, which for us being new, we get 25 more years of this. So it can be pretty lucrative. But we want that other 50% to come into a pool. That's how you can do infrastructure. That's how you can do other things. But you can do things that we didn't even know. We can do power washing with it. We can do events with it. We can create a capital reserve. So you're thinking about your old town hall. It'd be nice to pull a small amount of annual TIF because in 10 years you might replace something.
So with this tip, this is only off of a property tax, this isn't a sales tax
So
increase?
we're the lucky ones. We
Okay.
get both property and sales tax. So you were talking about a grocery store earlier. We're putting 500,000 into a natural grocers. Sales tax reimbursement. But we're gonna take the first 150,000 in sales tax. So when we talk about very lucrative projects, Mike also mentioned Sprouts. We have 2 grocery stores so we are anticipating just in 2 years, we'll have 1.8 million. And this isn't even the foundry. The foundry, all the money generated by the foundry goes to the foundry. Outside the foundry, we'll have 1.8 million annually because we have focused on stimulating projects that are now creating sales and property tax tip. Now we've got a serious amount of money because the infrastructure of 4th Street, 5th Street is shot. It's old, water lines, the underground's in bad shape, but it's the above ground too. So we're now finally getting ready, next year you'll start seeing improvements on 4th Street. We're gonna do all 5 blocks of it. It's because we got a revenue source.
Sales tax and property tax.
And we're gonna put right into it. But we are also, as we do this project, Fourth Street is like Main Street for Loveland, and so it's gotta be good. If you're gonna go do all this work, it's gotta be really special and memorable. And if you talk to Public Works, they think maintenance, and so we are coming to the table saying, we are gonna create a small piece of this annual TIF into a maintenance fund that won't have to hit the general fund, so that we can make sure that the quality of the design is really good. And that's super important. I think, your downtown is very similar to ours, is that there's a lot of development around town that could be anywhere. But you got your playing area that really defines your sense of place, and so, you have to stimulate it though. And so one of the decision you would have to make, all the other DDAs, Fort Collins, and Longmont, specifically close to, that's just, they get property tax tip. They made the decision in Loveland to do the sales tax, and it's gonna be incredibly lucrative.
And so this is a $5 million thing, and this is an increased tax you're feeding back, or are they
No,
taking a hit off
This
of?
is the city's sales tax. So
Okay, so we would lose some income up front.
you would get your base, whatever it is today, but let's say that, you did with the old town property. And if you did the sales tax, all the sales tax generated by that project could be TIF.
Of the new project.
Yeah,
So where the town currently is at 7.7%, we'd
We
have a
can see it on the
downtown
screen.
tax.
Oh, you can-
can you ask that again?
We'd have like a downtown tax on top of our regular sales tax.
No, we are getting the growth in the city sales tax. The state's still getting the growth in their tax, so we're 3% is what it is in Loveland. So I look at projects like this, this is, we got a vacant building here. If we can put an ice cream shop in it that's gonna do $500,000 a year, we're gonna get $15,000 in sales tax tip out of that project. That's dollars that we can, by our policy of doing 50%, we can put money back into that project, but we can also pull it back to do all these other things, especially infrastructure.
The thing from a strategy perspective too, that's why it lends itself to really good, it's very lucrative to redevelop publicly owned property. Because publicly owned, like your town hall, it's zero.
Yeah.
And you're not getting sales tax. We did there's the building on Cleveland Avenue between Fourth and Fifth. North of, not the bank building, but the building north of it. It was owned by the McKee Medical Foundation. So it was exempt from property tax, and they had a small thrift store. I think it did maybe a couple thousand in sales tax revenue per year. Once they sold it to a private developer, it's basically, if you think the base is zero or near zero, and so private developer went in and he put $2.5 million into it, added a handful of a couple restaurant bars, some other really retail, so all that kind of flows to the DDA because that base was so, because it's a public building, and that's why, when you're looking at your town hall building, the benefit is it's zero, so whenever, everything that goes into the private, once it converts over to private and all that tax revenue that comes in will then flow back into your downtown. It just a couple, just for clarification, I think you have to define what you're including within your plan of development. If you're gonna include your sales tax, so that's where you define that. If you say we're gonna include it, and I do, to Sean's point, I do recommend that because that's the thing, it gets a little harder to go back and try to redo it, because then you have to go back and do another election. So get as much as you can. When you're looking at within that plan of development. And then again, I think looking at the where those opportunities are to drive that tax increment revenue, I think is really important.
I noticed on one of your slides, you'd also mentioned a few of the Main Street programs.
Yes.
How do those work in relation to the DDA?
So the Main Street, the state has the Colorado Main Street program, and it's typically kind of targeted, I think, to smaller rural communities. In Colorado, I should say. So let me do kind of a step to the side, just to. And are you familiar with the Main Street or Main Street program?
Tim, yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. So you're.
Tim helped found one. We have the Birth of Main
We
Street.
haven't gotten our official status. but-
Oh, never mind.
Oh, you haven't. Okay, so you do have. So we do a lot of work.
Blind a bunch of people.
the way I looked at, I came out of the kind of Main Street School of Development, kind of working back east. And I think the benefit of the Main Street is it really provides the framework for managing and addressing kind of downtown redevelop issues. You know, you've got the design, you've the promotion, the 4 points, the economic restructuring, the redevelopment, and it's the design, organization, redevelopment, promotion. So you have you have the elements that you wanna focus on. And so in the case of Windsor was a Main Street community that had a DDA. So it's good if you can layer them on top of each other, and you can actually then access Main Street grant funding to do different events or to do different studies or to do different outreach. You can tap into that funding source to kind of help with some of those other, I'm a fan, I mean, I'm a big fan of the Main, I mean, just because it does provide that kind of organizing principle. And when I wrote the original, I did the original downtown strategic plan in 2009 for Loveland, and I organized it around the Main Street, the 4-point Main Street approach. And which I think is a good, I mean, because you know, downtowns have been using that approach for the last 50 years. I mean, it works, it's proven, you know, and so I think it's a good way to kind of to kind of think about, you know, what you need to do, the different buckets of focus that you need to have to be successful long term.
There's like 70 Main Street programs in Colorado and only 16 DDAs, so.
Yeah.
Compare
The
differences and how they work together or not.
well, the difference with the Main Street program is it's not, you don't have the opportunity to do the bigger redevelopment. It's largely kind of more of a planning, and the Colorado program is more focused on smaller communities. So it's not, you don't have the opportunity to collect tax increment and do the bigger investment projects, the infrastructure, the things that Sean was talking about through the Main Street program.
So DDAs are good if you wanna do major redevelopment.
Yeah, better. Yeah, I think if you wanna do kind of redevelopment and reinvestment, then DDAs are definitely, that's the tool you would use. Main Street wouldn't be a good fit for that.
So once a DDA, once the seats are filled, it becomes basically an independent entity that is going to make development decisions. That's oversimplification, right? But does it still have to follow the overarching town design and code requirements?
You have an overlay.
No, you can't, so yes, you have to follow, you're still subject to kind of all of those requirements. I mean, the one thing I mentioned, and I don't wanna get kind of too off topic, but DDAs do have the power to kind of seek rezoning. I mean, they have that authority. I haven't seen a DDA use it, but you can go do an overlay or plan or seek some rezoning. They can kind of advocate for that. But no, it's not, I mean, you're still subject to kind of whatever the town kind of planning and zoning requirements are. You're certainly not exempt. The one thing I would add to kind of what Sean had said earlier too about with DDAs and I mean, you are ceding kind of some authority over to the DDA board, but the challenge is, I think, for it to work, you really have to kind of be hand in glove. I mean, you have to work collaboratively for it to be successful. I think in part because if you think you're kind of an investor in the downtown, if you're investing in staff and resources to help make it successful, you know, the DDA is dependent upon that going forward, but so I think and you do as a board, I mean, you have the authority to create it, you also have the authority to terminate it. So I think you know, it's important that you know, when you set that up, that there's kind of an understanding you know, that they are independent but with some limitations. And that the best way, you know, you really need to kind of work kind of closely with the town for it to be successful over the long term.
So what's the difference between the town just designating an area for a budget line item versus actually having a DDA, which is a taxable district?
really that when it comes down to it, the big benefit is the ability to finance things long term. I mean, you don't really have, I mean, you're subject to once you're able to do the Tabor election, I think, I wouldn't, I mean, when you set up a DDA and do the formation, if you don't have the Tabor election behind it, it's not really worth in making an investment in that's really where the rubber hits the road. It's your ability to issue long-term debt to do larger projects, to do infrastructure investments, to do.
Can we do that as a town board?
Yeah, but I mean, you have to go through you have to go through municipal elections every time you're gonna issue debt and then that creates kind of it's a whole different animal, I think, to
Unless we do like, sorry to bring it up, but certificates of participation.
No, I brought it up from the beginning. I think there's a time and place for a COP. I mean, I
So-
disagree with the last one.
Well,
but I
we
disagree.
actually did the certificates of participation for the parking garage.
Yeah,
And and we did it, but part of the certificates of participation was needed a source of revenue to fund it. And we also had the city hall was under collateral while it was being built, which was, I mean, I had hair when we started that, I mean.
Yeah, 'cause that was the problem with the rec center is we didn't have much collateral, so we got a worse interest rate to have to do that. But it seems like in other areas, a COP is actually a better interest rate than a bond sometimes.
Yeah, and I think I'm certainly not kind of qualified to put we brought in kind of outside legal help to do it, but we had to put up the both City Hall and I think the new First Street municipal as collateral until it was built, and then when the parking garage was built, there's some design things had to, we changed a little bit, and so we had to go through a whole wrangling with the bank. And at the time, I mean, the benefit when we did it, the interest rates were still pretty low. I mean, these days it's tough. But for certificates of participation, I mean, if you're gonna do a parking garage or something, I mean, I think you can layer that with a DDA and just dedicate the revenue, which is what we did with the foundry. So the tax increment revenue that comes, as Sean had mentioned, that comes off the foundry goes to service the debt for the certificates of participation. So there's ways you could do it. It's just how you layer and how you. A lot of different ways you could do it.
Because the way I read this, it just sounds like a DDA, it's just another, kind of a version of a metro district for.
Yeah,
It's going into an existing development rather than a future development.
yeah, I think I know kind of metro districts are a little bit of a hot button issue these days, and so
Welcome to Berthoud.
what's it?
It's a welcome to Berthoud.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there could kind of be some parallels in the sense that, but you're not, with a DDA, you're not taxing, there's no, unless you have, and you're limited, you can only tax up to 5 mills. The voters have to approve it, have to approve that mill levy. When we went to Loveland, they voted that down. And we had to go back, we went 3 times to get the Tabor election, the third time we pulled the 5 mil. And we just did the straight Tabor election, so they don't even get the 5 mills. So it's not the difference with a DDA is you're not raising tax, you're not, there's no, you don't have the authority to kind of raise, the Metro District has the right, to increase your mill levy substantially in some cases. And the DDA doesn't have that, cause you're not, it's not there's no new tax with a DDA, with the exception of the mill, if it's voted on by the voters. It's just you're taking you're redirecting revenue that's created from the activity and focusing it back in the downtown. So I think that's a really key distinction with the Metro District.
Does everybody understand that, what he's talking about with tax increment?
Mm-hmm.
It's above and beyond what's generated in that base year. So either as properties redevelop and they're worth more and therefore taxed more, then whatever that delta is between what they were when that base year tax was identified and then what they're worth now once they're redeveloped, that delta is what is
Thank you. I
taxing.
did not understand that. Okay.
Everything below that stays where it was before.
But what about the sales tax?
It's
Same
the same thing.
But your
So
sales tax-
you
okay.
you establish a base.
So our
year.
2% right now, how would this apply in Berthoud?
It doesn't change your tax rate, it doesn't change any of that, so it's not an increase in taxes.
Mhm.
But again, let's say, right now, at the Old Town Hall is a good example, right? That site generates no sales tax.
Mhm.
So if we created a DDA in that base year, there is 0 sales tax generated at Old Town Hall. If that's then redeveloped, and there are several new, retail sales tax generating businesses that go in there, then that delta between 0 and what's now being created, that delta from the base year to what's now being created, is tax increment.
I see, and that makes sense what you were
So
saying
that
about
full
getting there
amount
early.
then goes into the DDA.
Correct, rather than into the general fund.
So but an existing business would only contribute what
They're-
additional revenue they generate.
They're not contributing
Base.
they're not contributing anything other than what they're already obligated to contribute, right?
So
They
the
they still
businesses
have
aren't
to
gonna see any more
submit, they still
additional
have to collect
expense.
4% sales tax on their retail sales that gets sent to the town, right?
Yeah,
That's our
the-
current tax rate.
For existing businesses, nothing changes.
Right.
They collect tax, they remit it, but if you think just for easy math,
So there's no monthly fees or.
no, nothing like that, not, so if just for in easy math, you create a boundary and, birth it, and you go to your finance and they look at they collect all the businesses and they say, okay, as of the last 12 months before we created, we collected $100,000 in sales tax revenue. That becomes, then that, if you think, just draw a straight line for the next 30 years.
Your baseline.
That's your base. And then next year you do the town hall development, and now you're generating $150,000 in sales tax revenue. Same sales tax, nothing's gone up. The 50,000, which is over and above the 100, that gets then directed into a special fund which can be used by the DDA for redevelopment. So
I need to apologize, that's on the screen right in front of me. So
Oh, yeah.
I could have just read that and that's great, thank you.
So yeah, and it is, and it's the same thing with property tax too. I mean, the town hall site, it's 0. You put a private developer in there, all of a sudden it's taxed as a private end. So now, all that property tax which you're collecting then kind of increases the revenue, and that gets directed to the DDA. The one thing I will say, counties, school districts, their revenue, it's all kind of bundled together, and so that revenue goes to the DDA. So for property tax, it's not just the town. You can, when you set up the plan of development, you could focus it just on city property tax. But a lot of communities, I think you do, you do all of the, whatever, I'm not sure what exactly your mill levy is. And I think that's part of the rub, sometimes with counties get a little, school districts have been okay, because I think they would get backfilled, and it gets filled other ways, but the counties, I think, have particularly when we were in the down cycles, because they see that some of that revenue gets redirected to the DDA.
Again, but it's only the increment.
And
We're not getting their base year
Right.
revenue, that
So
still
the
goes
best time
back
to
to
do a
them.
DDA is when you've got
It's
a
only
lot
the
of
increment.
bad space or blighted, as you called it, no man's land. You form it now, and then all the improvements benefit that DDA, and it doesn't affect anybody else really that's already been done.
For all intents and purposes, yeah.
In theory, but I will say that one of the challenges of when you're doing the redevelopment is a lot of times those development projects are dependent upon some of that TIF financing to do those improvements, so.
Mr. Murphy?
Yeah, looking at it, you've got 16 DDAs throughout Colorado. I would assume most of the larger municipalities have them. What would be the smallest one? Can you tell me that? Population wise.
Oh God, I'd have to think.
Our downtown's pretty small.
I think Windsor's probably one of the smaller ones.
Glenwood has one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I don't think some of the bigger I know like Colorado Springs has one, obviously Loveland.
But Denver doesn't use it.
Denver doesn't, yeah.
So, just looking at that, how does that really scale to a community our size? Obviously, we're pretty small, what would that look like for you guys being advisors in a situation like this? What kind of things would be a primary focus for implementation? Say we did our downtown here.
So I think kind of, you put me on the spot a little bit.
Just
so
loosely,
appreciate that. So I think part of, when I kind of look at it, I'm on the redevelopment side, so obviously it's my bias is a little bit, but I think part of what I would be looking at is for those opportunities like the town hall site. like where you have very low base, where where if you have surplus public property, where there's underutilized or properties or that have a higher upside. How can the DDA kind of both take advantage of that and positively impact that reinvestment? So that's what I would be looking at. And then I think from that, I would start to think about, okay, what are the gaps in your downtown effort? I mean, are there marketing issues or organizational issues that I think, or promotion, events, things like that? I mean, I look at Sean, who's just done kind of a amazing job with putting on events and bringing people into the downtown in Loveland, and kind of where are those needs? Programmatically, like is there a need for a facade program? I mean, that's a big one, especially for reoccupying or helping small businesses. If you can provide, $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 grants to redo front facades to make the businesses more inviting and welcoming. And then thinking about, from a infrastructure, what are the major infrastructure needs? I know you've done, Berthoud has done kind of some streetscape in recent memory. But do you have other utility needs like water and sewer lines and different things like that are going to support the part of it is trying to looking at what are the key elements that you need in your downtown district that are going to generate more investment.
That would be my question, maybe along the lines of a timeline. Is the prioritization, obviously all these circumstances are very unique, but prioritizing, bringing that revenue to bear upfront with the DDA. Obviously, the town's bringing some, but just bringing that to like your actual district. Is that like kind of the general focus on how you get these things rolling?
Yeah, I really think that the front end, what you do on the front end to kind of generate that investment is really critical to your long-term success. And I think, like as Sean said, when we were in Loveland, we did the Sprouts was a big, that was a big that wasn't included in the urban. I won't get into the details, but that was included in the DDA boundary. I mean, but that's opened up with that revenue being able to flow. It's opened up a lot of other opportunities to do things like the natural grocers and a lot of other program, investments that they've been able to where they've been able to take advantage of that kind of revenue.
And I would also keep in mind, if you start a DDA and the DDA issues debt, it's not backed by your general fund. It has to be backed only by the DDA. The DDA could go bankrupt. So it's hard to get a loan. Think about a regular business. The DDA has to show a revenue stream to get a loan. Whether it's
just like a credit score.
So
I mean, it's no different.
that's one of your reasons why you really need to think about stimulating some activity. Events can do it, some other things that can start drawing some sales tax, so that you generate a stream, because you could go into the town hall project, and you might not be able to get a loan unless you can show a revenue stream that a bank would loan to. So you got.
And you can't gift the DDA and like a seed money?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are other ways to structure it too, from a development where there's, where you just can rebate back the tax increment generated to the developer over time. The challenge is kind of what Sean was hitting on. He always used to say I have a 16-year-old who just got his driver's license and thought he'd buy a Ferrari and he could go out and get a loan, on a McDonald's salary, right? So but it's the same principles apply. I mean, when you go to a bank, they're gonna wanna look at kind of, okay, how much tax increment have you generated? And what income do you have or revenue that you're gonna have to service that debt? The riskier, because if you don't have that history, then obviously you're not gonna get good terms if you can get terms. And that's where I think, as Sean was kind of, I think the town can play an important role on that front end with kind of supporting some of that early. Yeah, allowing for some growth. Again, I have a tendency to get in the weeds because I could talk about kind of development and structure and development agreements and all day, get a few beers in me, but I think those first deals, when you think about how you're doing them, you're probably not gonna issue debt. just because you don't have the ability. What you're probably gonna end up doing is just more rebating back. So you make a $2 million investment and we estimate that you're gonna generate X amount of revenue or tax increment from the result of that. So okay, once we receive it, we'll rebate back 50% of it or 75% of it or whatever you negotiate for a period of time, and then that allows you to kind of start to establish that revenue history and things that allow. I mean, it's like Fort Collins has had a DDA for 50 or 30, 40 years. I mean, they have a line of credit at a bank and they can, and I think kind of Loveland is getting to that point over, but I think it just takes time.
One of the things I'll mention, you asked which is the smallest. I think the smallest one I'm aware of is Nederland.
Does Netherlands have,
They do
Just the
have-
carousel or what?
They have a DDA.
Awesome.
It was approved by
Then they
voters.
did.
They do have the 5 mil property tax that was approved by voters, and then the access to tax increment. But they're, I don't know, what's Netherlands, 2,000 people or something.
It's tiny.
Enough for a dead guy.
And then I actually have a question that occurred to me. I don't know the answer to this. Maybe you do, Mike. How much greenfield can be included in a DDA boundary?
I think the restriction really is how it's zoned. I think that they made some changes that you can't include, and this is, I think, probably because of Loveland, quite frankly, that land that had been previously zoned agriculture. But I think depending if it's a commercially zoned, I think you can.
Like if we think of downtown traditionally as like a 3-block stretch, right? I mean, it's very small, but like if we could go from, say, First Street at the roundabout where I think downtown starts, all the way to 287 along the Mountain Avenue corridor, this is some very big greenfield commercial projects. If you're able to incorporate those, and again, I don't know how the formation works, but
Yep.
that are zoned.
I mean, essentially the whole Main Street overlay almost, that you can just turn
That's
that
kind of
into
what
a
I'm
DDA.
suggesting, that our Main Street overlay district could be a reasonable boundary for a.
It's interesting, just to your point, I mean, one of the kind of dirty little secrets of Fort Collins is it wasn't when they set up their DDA urban renewal and they were doing all the redevelopment, if you talk to the folks in the 80s, they were struggling. I mean, they were 70% interest rates, the bonds, they were refinancing. There were a lot of problems. What bailed them out is they flagpole annexed the King Soopers and the Home Depot down on the south side. So they redrew the boundaries, and then all the revenue from the Home Depot then came, and then that allowed the reinvestment, and then the overnight success that was 30 years in the making became Fort Collins. But so that so that, to your point, I mean, and to some extent I think that helps too if you can, if some of the newer development that may not need as much of the incentive can help fund some of the redevelopment and reinvestment in the older part. I think that's a good potential strategy to use for.
Yeah, and the reason I brought it up is in my last jurisdiction in California, we had a redevelopment authority, similar in the way that they function, their tax increment financing districts. I wasn't there when it was set up. I was there when the state eliminated redevelopment authorities and then had to wind those down in the middle of paying off debt that was issued years, anyway, long story. But the city was intelligent enough to take a fairly large commercial corridor that had, that hadn't been built yet and include that in the redevelopment authority boundaries. And so when Albertsons built a big shopping center there, and a whole host of other development occurred along that greenfield, it generated an enormous tax increment. And we were able to issue really large bonds and make huge investments in downtown for a community a little smaller than Berthoud.
You just gotta get them interested in voting yes on the original district.
Yeah, I mean, redevelopment authorities were set up a little differently than DDAs are, so it's a little different strategy, but
But my experience is with some of the larger property owners, developers, it's a much easier sell because they're accustomed to using those tools. It's really the smaller, businesses that they see blight and you're gonna, and that their
Which
livelihood.
is a lot of us, to be frank, is a lot of small businesses on Main Street.
Right, and they, and it's carefully explaining that, it's not raising taxes. It's not, it's a way to help reinvest and help reinvigorate the your district. So I think having those kind of careful conversations and being able to identify who your champions are gonna be, I think is really important. When we did the downtown in Loveland, you know, in Windsor it was the same thing. You know, the Windsor was some businesses, some kind of key business owners that really understood it and saw the value. And in Loveland, the chamber director was really integral in kind of taking the lead and kind of making herself available to businesses and there were a handful of businesses, I think, and property owners who really saw the value that were, so I think thinking about it in that way, I think is it will kind of lead to more success.
Did you have a presentation as well? Okay, you're just here just here to help, thank you,
Yeah,
okay.
it's here to help. And that's the other thing I would add. We would, I mean, this is part of the job, I think, is to share information. And I work very closely with our directors in Longmont, Greeley, and Fort Collins. We all work together to help share information, so
That's very kind of you,
ask.
thank you.
That's what we're here to do.
Rather than not picking apart questions, I think sooner or later, we just wanna put out a bid for someone that can do, I mean, we use WENC for all of recreation, we use HDR for our transportation, it makes sense to just pick a firm to help us out.
It certainly would be helpful from our perspective, obviously, to have expert professionals to help guide us through kind of that process. I think a lot of it starts with outreach, right? And we have to start with education outreach to the business owners along Mountain Avenue corridor and property owners. But yeah, I mean, I think if it's something the board wants us to continue to explore, we certainly will. I mean, I think from a staff perspective, we see the value and the opportunity, and I think it's been discussed a lot tonight, right? This isn't like something that changes the world in 3 years, right? It's not like we form a DDA and then stuff happens, right? This is a long-term play, but I think we're hitting that phase in our kind of community's growth and redevelopment that it would be nice to have that extra tool to use in investing and redeveloping downtown. Especially if we can capture
Once it's
some,
built.
We have some chance to kind of shape it and guide it
Right.
before
Yeah.
the commercial already gets built out, exactly.
yeah,
We take advantage of that green zone.
yeah, exactly. Take advantage of some potentially really large tax increment if we're intelligent about the way that those things are established. How it's established, when it's established.
Well, you did say one thing that kind of caught my ear, and that was flagpoling, but it has to be contiguous. And that's where when you said agricultural land, could a flagpole clear out as far as like Lowe's? And
That's how we got out there.
I-25?
I don't know.
You just have to,
So we flagpoled all the way out to I-25 in early 2000s.
yeah, you just have to follow the
original.
the rights of way and make sure, I mean, it gets a little wonky when you're defining the plan of development, you have to do all the legal description. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm having nightmares and flashbacks when we were
Sure.
writing 2 pages of legal description. Which Sean
Try 10.
Sean inherited that and had to do some work with that, but yeah, it's definitely something you can look into. I mean, part of it is also, I mean, I would have a good legal representation, I mean, just to kind of advise. I'm not an attorney, and so I wanna be, making sure that you're in legally defensible positions and, I think is important.
Well, that's a big reach, but
I think you can do it. I mean, our boundaries are where 287 splits into where it comes back together, and the core of downtown is only like 7 blocks.
it's all those middle blocks.
Yeah, so that's why we have Sprouts in there, we'll have Natural
Yeah,
Grocers in there,
okay.
there's a lot of other.
Well, if we went all the way out to Love's, we could just use the same legal description from the land we got out there originally, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think,
I'm ahead of myself.
yeah, I mean, I think those are all the kinds of things we wanna explore in the kind of early, maybe I'd call it feasibility analysis, where we might take and look and say, what might the boundaries look like? What would that, what opportunities are there for both development and redevelopment? I think there's some initial feasibility work that we wanna do to kind of try and establish what that really looks like.
Yeah, I think as you do your outreach, be prepared to show like the programs, like tell people, hey, we can create facade programs, we can do fire suppression programs, you can let them get an understanding of the tools that they have. Even in Longmont, they give facade grants to their handful of residential properties because they add to the character of downtown. So make people understand truly what the tool can do.
Yeah, suppression, I've already heard, that's a great, if we could do that, it's a great tool, cause that's a problem, fire suppression. Elevators, that seems to be a big one too, for expansion, okay.
Yeah, it can be, the fire suppression is really it's digging the line to from the main into, is really the big expense. It's installing the fire sprinklers are not, is the.
Yeah, cause that's interior, I mean, how much,
You can
Can a
do all the
DDA do for
That's-
interior?
You just need to create your programs. We have a handful of buildings in downtown that are 80+ years and we just cannot make pencil. It's because they've got ADA issues, they might have electrical code issues.
Mhm.
So we are revamping our program specifically for those older buildings, 80 years and older. There's a few old churches. And we can put money into that. If not, what's gonna happen to them? They're never gonna pencil to a developer, so you can use this tool. But this just goes back to what Mike mentioned, just get good legal counsel. You can pay for it out of your TIF. And if you're not, I mean, this is the great thing about it, you have all of us neighbors around this, we'll send you all of our programs. Like, it's not that hard to,
Yeah.
this is a rip-off business in this type of work, so.
I'll take your sprouts too.
You were sharing about the legal term. I mean, was it you or Mike that shared with me?
Well, so the big, the mistake I think we probably made is that, blame a little bit on Mike maybe.
You say
that-
we, but you
Is
can.
that, we use the towns, the city attorney's office in Loveland, and to be honest with you, they just don't know this. This is a very specialized
Ah, okay.
piece of law. And so it's worth us to spend, to spend that money up front so that your programs are developed accordingly. So I'm not knocking the city.
So a real estate
Yeah.
They
attorney.
just don't know this.
So you contract out, you didn't hire a like
Yeah,
full-time?
exactly.
Okay.
So, you know,
Part of it was when we did it initially, it was a cost savings to the DDA, and so when we thought, okay, we
Bad
can.
idea.
Well, that was great, cause I was thinking that, so,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, there's plenty of attorneys that know this stuff well, there's not plenty, but there's a few, and they love this work. So that has really been the game-changing piece to us, is that we, earlier this summer, we got out of the city attorney's office, and all of a sudden, it's like, oh, we can do things we had
Yeah.
no clue of, just because we were getting really frustrated, but.
Yeah, I was thinking about it, we could be great to use our attorney, but that's great to know that in the long term doesn't make
And
sense.
your attorney can work hand in hand, but like this is truly a specialized piece of law. But the other piece is there might be conditions here that are different in Loveland, and so you can create programs around it to help solve some of your issues. So I just don't know. But definitely our biggest challenge in our downtown is just these old buildings. And we wanna make the rents reasonable. We don't want them to be $30 a foot, but no one's ever gonna be able to survive in our town in downtown that way. So we're fighting this constant thing, these buildings cost a lot to update versus we wanna make the rents reasonable. The TIF can be that middle piece to make the difference.
Fill that, yeah.
Have you found with DDAs, cause one of the things I've always thought about is how do we create affordable retail space for small, like businesses that are,
Absolutely.
they're trying to get out of their garage
Right.
and trying to get in a retail storefront, but like you said, they can't afford the $30-40 a square foot. They'd rather stay in their garage and keep their profit than go pay it all in rent, so
Yeah.
is there a way that DDAs can help make affordable commercial retail?
Yeah, I mean, you could write into your development agreements, if we're putting this amount of money into your project, we are basically asking for rent control. You can do so much with this. This just goes back to the legal piece, because that's something I hear from our council is, we'd like to we wanna make these small mom and pop type businesses successful. However, it costs a fortune to update these buildings, and we want our contractors to make good money too.
So we could take
DDAs are
like,
pencil. You can
so
make-
we've got all this new commercial that can go out here just west of us. That escalates the funding, funds the DDA nice and gives it some deep pockets. We could then take that money as an incentive to have someone cut their costs in their building so that they're not having to charge rent for a $5 million building, they can charge rent for like, that only cost me $2 million.
You can do a lot of things. There's conversion programs, so you may have every single restaurant space in downtown full. So expensive for a new restaurateur to come in and do all the updates, put the hood and all these things. You can create conversion programs with TIF to do that. So you're essentially making it easier so that a new restaurateur doesn't have to go, $250,000 loan to put a hood and all that stuff in there. You can do a lot with this program. I mean, you can do things that you wouldn't even think of. You could buy tables and chairs. You don't wanna do that, but you don't wanna set that precedent.
But yeah,
But
anything
it
to
is a
help
really flexible tool to meet your community
Didn't-
goals.
and build those
You bought
incentives to
traffic-
bring the businesses.
Didn't Sean, I think you bought traffic barricades, did you?
You can do something.
Wow.
It just lowers the barrier of
You can hire
entry so
bands,
much.
like, you can do a bunch of stuff.
Yeah,
You
and
have to issue a debt.
but there are I mean, as Sean said, I mean, there's ways to do different, you know, if you're looking to do something like that or subsidize or make space available, I mean, I think there are ways you could structure it that work, you know, for the community and for private development.
My question, so for your Loveland starting out, would you recommend some kind of overall associates, like,
Don't try to figure it out on your own, like
Right.
there's like these.
that's how you guys started, was with the firm, okay?
And Mike was right, they aren't attorneys, so
Mhm.
bring, whether under a contract, these guys could also bring in legal counsel, you know, to help with your formation documents. Yeah, you can.
Well, the attorney
How
that we,
much staff capacity do you have? I mean, that's
Yeah.
the other thing.
Yeah,
Um,
we would be looking for professional consultants to support us through that, for sure.
the attorney that we used in Windsor is the same attorney that they just hired for Loveland.
Yeah.
As Sean said, I mean, it's
And
not
he's
like
he's
there's,
the attorney in Fort Collins, I mean, like,
yeah.
why not borrow, if he has capacity, why not bring, but he's not a formation attorney, that's not, his job is not, he is there to be your day-to-day legal counsel, work on your development agreements, your facade agreements, understanding of state law. That's your, like your, I don't know what your technical name is, but your day-to-day counsel. There are specialists that just work on this formation
Okay.
stuff too.
Yeah, we have a general counsel. I mean, so what does staff from here, does this go back to a regular meeting for the board to discuss?
Yeah, I think what we'd wanna do is, if the board is supportive of us continuing to explore, we'll kind of circle up at the staff level and maybe talk to some other professionals about kind of what's the right next step. I mean, I think we know what that looks like. It certainly will involve a consulting contract of some kind for professional services that would come back to you to approve. And then we go from there.
So tonight, though, no direction, but I guess I'd ask the trustees, do we want this on an agenda? I just see this as a great opportunity, I wouldn't want this to slide another year, so how would staff wanna see us have this discussion?
We'd like to just bring it back to you. I don't wanna spend the time going and figuring it out.
Right.
But it sounds like there's some support to at least start that process of figuring it
That work
out.
for you?
And-
Okay.
And we can do that within our existing
That's what
budgets.
this
I
and
think you just got staff direction to,
Yeah.
come back with that.
We will.
Well, could I bring up a point?
Yeah, absolutely, I was just quick curious.
Just, I'm kinda out of the loop on the business discussions on this. I almost would like to entertain like an open house for the businesses before we put it on the agenda.
I think it would be very much part of that next step, right? I think it's important that we get professional support. We do
Right.
have limited staff resources, right? Whether it's Ayers and Associates or somebody else. But and then start that outreach and kind of feasibility analysis. Let's start to try and define what that area looks like. Let's have some community open houses and explore the idea with businesses and property owners along these kind of along a proposed district, and let's start to see how that looks, right? Cause you won't be approving this for a while, right? Like we won't be going to that next, to like the,
it'd be nice
let's
to have it
commit
evolve
and form
early.
a DDA or try to form a DDA. We're not gonna be there for a while, right? There's some work that's gonna have to occur before then.
Maybe put a simpler way. I haven't heard that there's interest for this, but I don't know, have you guys heard that?
Well,
I
and
mean,
but I didn't know how these things work. I could see definitely an open house, but just like with the recreation program, we hired a consultant to help out with that open house and surveys. So we could use one of these and then the businesses say no, but it's probably a good way to,
I'm just questioning spending the money for a consultant
Yeah,
to
so I
step
think-
in first.
I think the
rather
way I'd
than
answer that is-
after.
One, this gives us a tool to then go and implement a lot of the vision and ideas that we articulated in the Mountain Avenue overlay plan.
Sure.
And so we look at it from that perspective, like we articulated a pretty broad vision of kind of the development, redevelopment of the Mountain Avenue corridor, and this would be a tool to do that. And then in the context of Old Town Hall and the Third Street redevelopment, we've talked about this really broadly with business, and there is a desire for us to invest in downtown.
Sure.
And we're making investments in downtown significant, right, millions of dollars out of the general fund this year and in the coming years. But I think, you know, again, we haven't talked about this specifically with businesses, but we talked about it generally, like, you know,
Sure.
would there be support to create some opportunities for redevelopment? The answer is yes.
Just a suggestion.
Sure.
Since you are a Main Street community, you can, and we do a lot of work with Main Street, we could actually help see if we could access grant funding to do some of that preliminary outreach. You know, cause there are planning grants, small, I mean, we're talking less than $10,000 to kind of do some planning and, you know, some of that kind of smaller outreach stuff through through Main Street. And I mean, if it's something you kind of were interested in, cause I know, you know, obviously, you know, budgets are finite, you know, general fund, so, you know, we could look into kind of seeing if there's some grant funding we could kind of access to kind of pay for that.
And that's was something I was gonna ask again was, does the DDA board, would they act as like a Main Street board? Would they operate, or would that still be a separate board?
You know, it just depends on how you
Can it be
set it
blended?
up. And what I would recommend is if you're gonna do a DDA board and you have a Main Street, is make it the same.
Okay.
Just you know, and I mean, you would probably have some technical things you'd have to do, but I would definitely kind of make sure that they're clearly aligned and you know.
Because it'd be the same people.
Yeah, right,
Involved, so it'd makes sense to have one board that is the DDA and Main Street and have them.
And that's, in
Be one
Windsor,
and the
that's
same.
what we did, the DDA board was the Main Street board.
Yeah, and we actually have two boards in downtown, we have Loveland Downtown Partnership and the DDA, and it's not the easiest thing, you know, there's not a deep bench out there, people that wanna take the time to do this, and I don't know what it's like here,
Yeah.
so I think part of your open house is, who's gonna champion this, who wants to step up?
Well,
and-
that's the thing that we run into down here is like, we get this group doing an event on Saturday, and then this group's doing their version of that same event on Saturday, and this group's saying, well, I can do that, and I wanna do it on Saturday too. And so we end up having like 3 or 4 similar type
Sure.
things
It
happening.
could consolidate
It's like, who's
pretty quickly
doing
though,
what?
because there's money, that's the
Yeah.
DDA, it has resources,
That is.
it's all gonna roll,
Yep.
it will.
Yeah, but it just gets real, I mean, we just had a little group meeting, we'll organized it with Chris to bring together some of the kind of the key players in downtown of like, hey, you know, how come there's not more collaboration? And so one of my concerns is like, oh, here we go, we're adding one more group to this table of uncollaborative people
This group will have money.
and how
Yeah,
to
this is an
This
authority.
is a little different
This is
ballgame.
an authority.
come up with the most
It'll
money
be a,
wins.
it'll be a hub too, right? I mean, it'll become the hub and those other partners are still gonna exist, right? But they'll become the spokes of that wheel, I think.
And the DDA could give money, that's the thing, they could grant money to different, you know, small group wants to do a car show, whatever it might be, you can use that money.
And is the DDA considered a for-profit or a nonprofit?
You know, it's like, it's a quasi-government agency.
Okay.
It has core requests, all of these same, you know, things that.
So it's kind of like the town, where they're not considered a
Yeah, and the DDA can
nonprofit.
be sued.
Yeah, so they're not considered a nonprofit or a profit, for-profit, kind of like how the town is not considered for-profit or not.
Yeah, they're closer to how the town's set up.
So the nonprofit side of things would be the Main Street program.
Yeah.
So,
And having, so we have a 501c3 wing, like we have a downtown Loveland Foundation specifically, sometimes people just they wanna donate money, but that's the only way they'll do it. So,
This is really exciting. Thank you. Didn't know this. Any other questions?
If I may just, Sean, to your point, when Chris and I was thinking about this, as I said in the memo, this is information purposes only. So we brought this before you looking for direction of what our next steps should be, and I think we got it.
Got
I
it.
think we've got it, yeah. Yeah, it's exciting.
It is. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming out
Thank you
tonight.
so much, guys.
I'm worried I'm gonna walk out and see 6 inches.
You might.
It's just
But think what you guys might have started, you know, it's pretty fantastic.
I do have one question for you though.
It's like a silver bullet.
I was just walking downtown and I noticed those light towers.
Administrator Cook, you still wanna go with item 3? Or is it?
Oh, I forgot that was on the agenda. I was like backing up.
You wanna wait
Six.
you wanna wait till?
Why don't we just do it next week? We can talk study sessions next week. I think we'll have time.
Meeting adjourned.
Sweet.
We're not gonna have another study session between now and then, so.
We still have a call tomorrow.
Yeah, I was just to encourage the.
I wanna get some light.
Yeah, that was to talk about, can we do it during the nights before?